There is a peace and a joy in my family that anybody that has gotten to know us over the last couple of years comments on, that there's a feeling in our house. And I cry almost daily still because I know what the feeling was in our house before that. And it was so dark. And it's been 8 years now of this pure joy and 10 years really of our marriage getting better. And not for 1 second am I ever going to forget where we came from. And that God was never away from us during that period. I see that now. I see that when I had no connection to him, when I wasn't turning to him, he was still right there. He was just waiting.
Welcome back to the Modern Lady podcast. You're listening to episode 60. Hi, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Lindsay. And today we are talking about me and God. Have you ever wondered if people really can change? I'm here to tell you that they can and that they do, and I'm living proof of this. For 20 years of my life, I was not the woman that you have come to know, and I think it's time that I share my story.
But first, we love bringing the Modern Lady podcast to you every week. It truly is a labor of love. All we ask in return is that if you haven't yet taken just a few minutes to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever app you use, we would appreciate you doing that so much. Your comments truly mean the world to us. And if you would like to leave us a comment, you can do so on our website as well at www.themodernlady1950.wordpress.com. Or you can always find us on Facebook or Instagram at The Modern Lady Podcast. Just a note here, dear listener, before we begin, that parts of our episode today does deal with a little bit of mature subject matter, and so we just ask, once again, that you exercise caution and discretion before hitting play and continuing on the journey with us today. When is a reversion really more like a true conversion? In a quote often attributed to St. Augustine, he notes that, quote, "There is no saint without a past, no sinner without a future," end quote. And it's that change of heart and radical transformation of a person that is most edifying and inspiring when we hear about their stories. So today we get to hear yours, Lindsay.
Yeah. And I'm nervous for the first time ever in our podcasting. It feels like episode 1 all over again. But yeah, I'm really honored to be able to share my story with everybody. And so thank you, Michelle, for doing this.
Yeah, you know what, when we talked about this and when you brought up that possibly it was time to share your story, it felt right for both of us, this timing. And I think we're at a point now where we are in the world as a human race, as a community of people, where we need to hear people's stories, right?
Yeah. So
much of what we need to move forward in love and in relationships with one another is to truly know people. And God does amazing things in everyone's life, and we need to share those stories. And so I'm really happy that we have an opportunity to do this today, because I think it's important, and I'm just grateful that you are going to get the ball rolling.
Well, I think that the message that is most important for me to convey is, like I said in the opening, that people do change. I mean, I guess the thing we can look at is like celebrities and politicians and how they're raked over the coals when they try to express something new. People go back to 20 years ago. We see this, you and I've actually talked about this with Twitter and stuff before, where heaven forbid you maybe had a few too many glasses of wine and tweeted an inappropriate joke, like made a mistake like we all do. And it's coming back to haunt you later, and then you lose your job. Like, people are forgetting that people absolutely can change radically. And we're not talking about that. And I want my story, if people know people like how I used to be, and you have somebody like that in your life, maybe that you care about, and they're not a good person like I used to be, know that it's not without hope, and that we can radically transform our lives and become really different people for the better, right? People can change and for the worse too, but I think that we focus so much on those stories that we forget that a lot of people can really become better people. And mine is truly only through God, with God. All good things flow from God. And so I'm going to be talking about God a lot, but which is so funny because I never talked about God. So,
Right.
right. And that's what is so funny is that I've had it commented to me a few times where people have been shocked who know me from the past, who haven't heard from me in a while, that Lindsay Jones, my maiden name, has a podcast on Catholicism. What? Like people are so shocked. And I actually love that I have done such a 180 that they would be that shocked that Lindsay Jones can sit here and talk about God. And so that's what I'm going to do right now.
Perfect. Yeah. Just this message of nobody is beyond God's mercy.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Nobody is beyond God. And sometimes we can feel a little bit helpless in knowing how to help the people around us, the people that we know, but to know that as much as we love them, God loves them more. Absolutely. And his handprint is all over all of our stories. So let's get started with yours. I'm really excited to get started. So. Okay. From the beginning, from the top, take it away. Take it away.
Okay. So I am the oldest of 3 kids. I have 2 younger brothers. I grew up in a great family, wonderful mom and dad, and they're celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary this April. They have a great marriage. Both of my parents attended church every Sunday as kids. My dad was raised United. His parents were very involved in their church. My grandma taught Sunday school for most of the years. My mom was raised Catholic. And so they just both came from very faith-filled families. I was born in 1980, and like so many children born in the late 70s, early 80s, corresponding with Vatican II or not, there was a large movement away from regular mass attendance. And so my parents certainly weren't alone in that. And there was an increase in extracurricular activities in families and just busier lives. And so we did not go to mass when I was a child, aside from Palm Sunday, Ash Wednesday, and Easter and Christmas Eve. And so that was, my experience of church. Now, I did go to Catholic school from kindergarten until grade 13. And I don't want to bash the Catholic school system in Ontario, but I know that I am not alone in saying that it didn't serve me well. I didn't learn very much. Now, I do believe that this is different if it's being reinforced in the home. So while my parents, I think, certainly love God and stuff, we didn't do any catechesis at home. Let's just say that. So I didn't learn a lot about the faith, right? So that was basically my childhood. When I was about 11 or 12, I was given a voodoo doll, and everybody just thought it was cute. It came back on a vacation with a family member. I started researching voodoo at like 11 and 12. And at that time, I would get to the library on my own and get huge stacks of books and read whatever I wanted. And I just really fell into learning about the occult. I was fascinated by the occult at a very young age. At the same time, I started convincing myself that there was black magic and white magic, like good spells and bad spells, and that I could learn all the good stuff, right? The love spells and that kind of thing, and that it was completely fine to do that sort of thing. And so it started with voodoo, and then it went very quickly into palm reading. And I taught myself how to read palms at a very young age. And Michelle, I am not exaggerating. I could read things on people's palms, adults' palms, that was shocking, that I shouldn't have known about them. Yep. And so much so that at my Catholic elementary school, I actually did my grade 8 class speech on extrasensory perception, spontaneous human combustion, palmistry, tarot cards in grade 8 in my Catholic school. Yeah. And they were so blown away by my ability to read palms that I actually was taken around to the teachers during lunch break and the principal and read all of their palms in my Catholic school. So nobody ever indicated that there was something maybe not healthy about this. It was encouraged. I read everybody's palms. Like it became like a party trick, but I'm not also going to pretend that I don't think there was a demonic influence there as well, because there were things like people's miscarriages or abortions that I saw in their palms that I asked them privately about, and I was correct with the number and when it happened to them. Yeah. The occult then led obviously to witchcraft, Wiccanism. And so when I was 13, I really started exploring Wiccanism. And I found a book or two books at the library that I go to repeatedly that I just was absolutely fascinated about and fascinated by. And it really was this idea of getting in touch with my feminine genius, which is so funny how we end up, right? You and I talking about true femininity. But I was always that hunger for me even then about this idea of what kind of power do I have as a woman? And as a very young girl, I was really drawn to the feminine aspect of Wiccanism, to the idea of female goddesses, feminine empowerment. And I was just really into Diana the Huntress Queen, like these female goddesses of ancient mythology. One of the things with witchcraft is that it is made very attractive. I feel like every 10 years, a movie comes out or a TV show that makes witchcraft very attractive to teenage girls. Now, I started this before the movie The Craft came out, but the movie The Craft came out about 2 years after I had already started studying witchcraft. And so there's a huge group of women doing that. I would say the same is right now with Sabrina, the teenage witch, the new version on Netflix. Yeah. As soon as I saw the commercials, I'm like, yep, this is exactly going to trigger preteen and teenage girls who are looking for that supernatural. It's incredibly alluring. And when you're a 13-year-old girl and you're trying to figure out what your role is, especially as you're transitioning to high school and you want to reinvent yourself going into high school, it's this idea of having this power. So I was always very drawn to having a mystical knowledge, or a knowledge that I felt like other people didn't have, and drawn to the supernatural. I think we'll touch on this later, which is so funny how I ended up as a traditional Catholic, because I found that my desire was fulfilled in that. But that's
foreshadowing.
Right. But that's what I was always looking for. I've always wanted to be different. I've always, since I was that age, would spend countless hours researching. It was a lot harder before the internet. So I'd come home with my stack of 10 books. But I always wanted to know stuff that was different than my peers. And so I get into high school. So right before I got into high school, it was time to be confirmed, right? The sacrament of confirmation. And I already knew I didn't really want to be confirmed. And I had already challenged the school on picking a saint name. I did not want to choose a saint name. I was challenging them. I wanted to use the book of the Bible, Genesis. They wouldn't let that happen. I was just not into it. Like, I already knew I didn't feel like called to make that decision as an adult within the church in that way. But I went through with it anyways, because you just do. And you just do. And nobody, again, talked to me about it. So I get to grade 9, and I've always been a musician. I love music. I was immediately friends with the long-haired musical guys from high school. Like, this is 1994. So it's like the height of grunge music. And so this is my immediate crew. And I'm still studying Wiccanism. And at this time, I discovered a musician that changed literally the course of my next 10 years. So I had been playing the piano for many years, and like many kids, had no desire to play it. Like, it really, I could care less about it. It meant nothing to me. And then I stumbled across a music video by a musician in the early 90s named Tori Amos. And she sat straddling seductively a piano bench and was playing a song called Crucify. And it was beautifully shot, and her music, she played the piano and sang, and it was sultry and it was powerful, and she was like in control of that piano, and it blew my mind. I was like, okay, I love this. And her message, the message of that song, Crucify, she's like, why do we have to crucify ourselves? Every day I crucify myself. Nothing I do is good enough for you. Well, it completely fit into that narrative that so many teenage girls have, right? And it just added so much fuel to the fire for me. So I started playing her songs on the piano and singing her songs, and bought all of her albums and all of the B-sides and all of the rare discs brought in from Europe and all that kind of thing. Anyways, I went really deep into her music, and then I started finding a lot of other music. And this is important for me to share because I firmly believe that this was one of the gateways into, I don't want to say evil, but I guess I did really go down an evil path, but it furthered my, attraction to the dark side and to the occult. I am a writer, I am a reader, and so lyrics don't just pass over my head, right? I am one of those people who like look up the lyrics or read the song notes. And so I paid attention to every lyric of every song, and it just was like fueling this rebellious fire within me. So in high school, I was either liked or hated on whatever particular day, but I think a lot of people knew me. I had, there's a lot of rumors about me, especially about the witchcraft part. And I was always fine with that. I actually loved it. If you're talking about me, then at least I'm on your mind. Like, I loved it. Again, it made me feel so different and powerful. The only thing that really got me through high school was having a best friend that I met in grade 9 who was the complete opposite of me. And she wasn't into any of this, but we've just been best friends since grade 9. And anyway, she was kind of like my rock during this period. Mm-hmm. So in high school, in grade 9, I did the standard grade 9 testing where they test you in English and math. And in the math area, I was not performing well. But in English, I was operating at an OAC, which at that time was Ontario, like grade 13 at that level. And so the teachers met with my parents and they said that they needed to fast track me through high school as quickly as possible. And so starting in grade 9, I was put into some grade 10 classes. And then in grade 10, I was put in grade 11 classes. And either way, I kind of skipped most of grade 11 and grade 12 and was fast tracked through high school, which was not a good plan.
No. Yeah.
Academically, I guess I could handle it, but socially, no, it was not a good place for me to be in. So we brush it off as being that rebellious high school phase, but I can feel it today at 39 years old with the same power that I felt it at 15. And all I wanted was somebody to talk to me about it. I even wrote for a high school religion class. I wrote about my atheism. I wrote about hating God, and I got an A+ on it. And my teacher was a former seminarian. Like, I look back now and I'm like, why didn't you pull me aside and ask me about why I felt that way about God? Every time we did a school mass, of course, I didn't get up and go to confession. And I didn't receive the Eucharist. And I was a full-on atheist by that point. And the chaplain wouldn't talk to me. Like, nobody, they just ignored the signs. And all I wanted was somebody to ask me how I was doing. I started university 2 years younger than everybody else. But this is the other thing too. I've always looked my age. Like, I've always looked old. I've always looked 40. We can put a picture in the show notes. So here I am. I'm a very, very young girl. And I don't realize how young I was until I look at my own daughter, who's 13 now. But when you're a 17-year-old in university, now, when I was 17 and I started university, like I said, I was 2 years younger than everybody else. That is the common age to start university now, because they got rid of the last year. And so, right. And so I was 2 years younger than everybody else. But the thing is, so I'm younger emotionally, and I also look like a grown woman. I have enough makeup on that so I'm treated like a woman, and I'm thrust into a more adult situation, and I'm working. And at that time, I was in a very long-term relationship with a guy. I was 17, but we were practically living together. And I just was like living the life of a 30-year-old, but I was not ready to live the life of a 30-year-old, right? At this time too, I was not a nice person at all. I wasn't kind, and I didn't want to be kind. I wanted to be hard and tough and powerful and dominating. I thought that that's what strong women were. That's what I was taught from the culture, is you square your shoulders and go face to face with men. Do you know how many men I would literally try to fight, actually fight? I would go face to face with, because I just never wanted to be this pushover woman. And at the same time, I used my femininity and my young girl looks I don't want to say good looks because I don't want to be prideful, but I had a lot of makeup on and I had some physical attributes that I played up. And again, this was like everything that I thought a woman was supposed to be. I wouldn't say I was a very kind person. And there's enough people out there that will say, yeah, you were kind of a bad word. And so I loved that. I prided myself on that. I got very good at being a very cruel woman. So I'm in university. I'm not a very good person. And I keep meeting Christians, like not Catholics, but like Bible school attending Christians. And like keep meeting them. I mean, like Christians were crossing the street to come over to tell me about Jesus. Like it was happening a lot. And I was so disgusted. Like I did not like Christians. I thought
this was not welcome attention.
No. Okay. I thought what fools they are, like especially Christian women. I thought Christian women were so lame and so boring and so unintelligent and so weak and so I was physically repulsed by it. Like truly, I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
So I just had zero interest in Christianity. I wouldn't say I had zero interest in God, but like so many people, I didn't like his Christians, right? A lot of people were like, it's not God. It's
good way to put it.
Yeah. I didn't like his church. I didn't like, and again, actually I should separate this because I didn't really know, this is heartbreaking for me to say as a Catholic now, but I don't feel like I met any Christians in Catholic school. Like my whole time there. And it wasn't until I started meeting non-Catholic Christians from Bible school that I actually met Jesus-loving Christians. And that was really my first encounter with them, despite having been in a Catholic school from the age of 5 until 17. So I start meeting them and I'm like, ugh. But I kept hanging out with them because some of them were fun. And so and again, I was trying to steal all the guys. So I'd go hang out with them. And one of my friends from high school had been a strong Catholic and then started going to different non-denominational Christian churches and became essentially born again and was talking a lot about Jesus. And we were close friends. And I would just put up with it. And we'd get into big debates, right? Only those big debates you get into when you're 18 and you're staying up late and you're having a sleepover and you're talking. And we'd have those. And she kept saying like, I just want you to know Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, I just don't care. Like there's zero interest in here, but we were good friends and she just was relentless and in a very polite and funny way, to the point where I just found a note from her tucked in one of my university textbooks, saying that forget about so-and-so that you have a crush on. There's one guy who will love you forever. And his name is Jesus. Like she tucked those in my book. Right. Yeah. At that time, she gave me this little, unadorned wooden cross, just that it would fit in this palm of your hand. That's going to come in later in my story. But she gave me this little wooden cross and I knew she was praying for me, but no interest. Okay. So Jesus, I guess, was fed up of trying to send Christians to me and that wasn't working. So one night, I had a dream. And this is where people can think I'm crazy or not, but it's fine. So in this dream, I was standing at the side of a very busy highway. So it was essentially the 401 here in Ontario. And the cars are zooming past. And I'm standing there and I'm terrified, like I'm shaking. And I know I have to cross the highway. I know I have to get to the other side, but I'm terrified of taking that first step. And suddenly there was a man beside me in the dream and he just led me across the road. Like somehow we just made it through all the cars without any trouble. And we get to the other side and we sit down and there's a group of people there and he sits down with us. And out of nowhere, this huge wolf came running at us and he had these big teeth. And we were all very, very scared in the group. But the wolf came right up to the man and laid down calmly. And the man said, and I quote, because I've never forgotten his exact words, "As I have tamed this wolf, so too will you be peaceful if you walk in my light."
Right?
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
So,
okay.
Done. I wake up and I'm Christian. Nope, I don't. I wake up. And I laid in bed and I remember looking at the ceiling and I said, okay, I hear you, like loud and clear. I hear you. And I said, and I am not ready. I do not want to become Christian.
You just imagine like someone in heaven. Well, did you use the wolf? I used the wolf. Still no.
Somebody's in trouble up there. Yeah. Did he have his teeth out? Yeah, he had his teeth out.
I mean, sure, everything went according to plan.
Did Jesus actually talk to her? My guardian angel's up there getting in trouble or something.
Yeah. Oh, it's hilarious.
Yep.
Okay, so still no go though.
No go. I am as stubborn. I'm still to this day one of the most stubborn people you'll ever meet. So I said, nice try, essentially, but come back later. Not interested. Don't want to be a Christian.
Oh my goodness.
But I was shaken up. Like, I won't
Sure,
pretend like I didn't stick with me. So I called that friend right away and she's like, oh my goodness, this is your St. Paul Damascus moment. I had no idea what she was talking about because I had the craziest thing is that afternoon, a very bright light had actually almost knocked me out of the shower when I was showering, which sounds crazy too. And I jumped out wet and almost fell because I thought the power had surged.
Yeah.
And so I remember telling her about that and then the dream and she's like, oh, you're going to become a Christian. And I'm like, no, what? No. And so I just was in a weird place. Now I had broken up with my boyfriend I'd been with for over 2 years. And this Christian friend I had been talking to this guy online. And it was about 1998, 99 maybe. And we started calling him Internet Boyfriend. And I thought he was going to kill her because the internet was still new. And she and this guy decided that they were going to meet in person after a year of communicating online and on the phone. I met him too. And in typical bad Lindsay style, I wanted him. And I was actually there with my boyfriend and I turned to my boyfriend and said, this guy is so awesome. I'm going to date him. And he's like, he is really awesome. I'm like, he's so awesome. I'm going to be with him. Like, I just was an awful. So anyways, that guy was Jason. Man.
Oh, whoa,
yeah.
Whoa.
Met my husband.
Yeah, plot twist.
Okay.
Okay. Wow.
So I meet Jason. He is in school. He's doing at this time he was finishing his bachelor's of theology. And his original plan was to be ordained as an Anglican minister. So he's at Bible school. Again, I'm not kidding when I told you I kept meeting people from Bible schools. And so I meet him. I had the dream at this point, but I wasn't really committed to Christianity. And so I borrowed a copy of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis to make sure I had in my room when he came over to meet me. So he could think I was reading C.S. Lewis. The thing with Jason is that when I met him, he was like the most charismatic, fun guy ever. He had been like a Christian camp counselor and we had all been having a bonfire and he was like teaching everybody these fun Christian camp bonfire games. But then he snuck over and he bummed a cigarette off me. And I was like, oh, this guy's interesting. Like what? He's going to have a smoke with me? Like what? And him and I started talking and he started revealing a little bit about his own life. And I'm like, okay, whoa, like you're two different people here. And I found that incredibly intriguing at first. It's not intriguing later. And so Jason and I start dating. He at this time now has been accepted into a master's program at University of Toronto for a Master's of Divinity. And all week in school, he was learning about the faith. And then all weekend, he was hardcore partying in downtown Toronto. I lived an hour and a half away. And so we would take the bus between our two apartments all the time. And I started partying with him in Toronto. The thing is with Jason, he has never had a crisis of faith. He's always loved God. Like he's always trusted that God is real and that it's his, he wants to have a relationship with Jesus. Like he's always had that. Now, he's gone through great periods in his life where he has lived a very sinful life, but he always loved God. Like he always wanted to please God, very much a fatherly relationship. And I didn't understand any of that. I just saw, again, a hypocritical Christian, which is what I kept seeing. This is why I was so bothered by Christianity. I just saw so much hypocritical behavior and it was exemplified in him and my new boyfriend. And what I felt was interesting with us is that we could pray together because I was starting to become more interested in Christianity as I was starting to date him because he was answering some of my questions. For the first time in my life, I had somebody that answered my questions because he was educated in it. And we fought it out. Oh my goodness, we had so many fights about faith. But we could pray together, and then we could go and party together in Toronto. Like we could kind of live in two different worlds, let's say. And that gets exhausting. Of all the things I am, I'm always true. Like I am who I am, for good or for bad, right? Like when I was that Lindsay, I was that Lindsay, no matter if I was talking to my grandmother or a stranger or a priest or anybody. I was never hid who I was. I was always very authentic. And I couldn't go on for much longer with Jason being inauthentic. I'm like, pick a lifestyle. Like, are you going to be a pastor or are you going to be a party boy? Like, I'll support you in either one, but I just don't like you not being true to whatever you think you have to do. And this was a big theme in the first 4 years of our relationship. We dated for a long time before we got married, and we fought all the time. We had nothing in common. Nothing. Like, I don't know. I honestly,
Looking back.
And he says this too, like, we don't know why we were together. I think we've always had a friendship for sure. And and he makes me laugh, but I don't know how we got through 4 years. And at one point, I think it came down to you either break up or you get married. So we got married and there was no prep for getting married. We did no premarital counseling. We had no idea what marriage was. We were not attending any church regularly, despite the fact that he was now within the very last stages of being ordained. And I'll have to tell you that in my head, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be a pastor's wife. And I had this vision of wearing big black sunglasses and a tight black skirt and like having a cigarette outside of my hand, like hanging out in my hand and like holding
in church.
At the back for doing a Bible study. Like this was our Bible study night. And I was going to be like, okay, come to the Bible study.
To clarify.
Yeah,
that's right.
Probably at church though too. Clarify. Yeah, like that was my idea of like, I guess I have to host Bible studies. Like it was so not in my realm of understanding at all. But I do know that I went out and bought, as I show on Instagram all the time, a set of dishes that I called my pastor's wife collection. So I bought like 10 teacups and saucers and 10 dessert plates and 2 serving platters. So I just made sure I had cute stuff for our house to be a pastor's wife, but zero connection to Jesus. Okay. So
got it.
We're about to get married and it's based on nothing. So picture me as you're thinking. So me, right? The selfish, bossy, controlling, power driven, rude me. And then I get married. Like that's the woman I brought into that marriage. We had not talked about having children. I think we both could have cared less if we had had children. I was still, because we lived in the town where I grew up, I still had all my own friends my whole life. And he lived a life in Toronto. We were basically roommates who, when we were together, we would fight. At this time, too, he had been told by his bishop to take a year or 2 off to pay down his school debt before they would ordain him. So it put his ordination on hold, which was a crushing blow to him. He had felt God's calling to be a minister since he was 7 years old, and they questioned his calling, and that was his only plan. He had no plan B. Like, that's all he went to school for.
Wow.
So now we're married. He doesn't know what he wants to do. I'm working in retail. Like we have no money. We have almost $100,000 in debt. Things weren't good. So we had been married a year, and in 2005, my maternal grandmother was dying, and she was really the only practicing Catholic that I knew. And when she was in hospice care, she died hard, as we say. Like it was a long 9 days of like, okay, it's going to be today. Okay, it's going to be today. Okay, it's going to be today. Like, right. It was a long time. And it ended up being this incredible time because all of my cousins, all of us were there. A lot of us were newly married, but there were no babies yet. So it was just like we were all able to leave our jobs and all be there at the hospice with her and reminisce. And my family is hilarious. So there was just a lot of laughing, even as she's dying. Like we were all joking over top of her as she's dying because that's just who she was too. This is a grandmother who would carry a fake egg in her purse and throw it at the other Catholic Women's League old ladies and pretend that she was going to throw an egg on them and then laugh so hard at them. And so, right. I could tell a lot of stories about my nanny. She was awesome. So on her last night alive, Jason and I were staying over in her room. We slept there that night. I'd slept over a couple nights, but this happened to be her last night. And that morning at 5:00 in the morning, she was making the horrible death sounds. There's a death rattle that people will know once they've heard it. And I was alone. Well, Jason was snoring. So there's a different kind of rattling happening around the corner. Jason's snoring his brains out. And I'm staring at my dying grandmother. And it was torrential raining. I mean, like out of a movie, torrential raining outside. And it's pitch black because it's November and it's cold and it's damp and it's 5 a.m. And there's only a very, very dim light on in her room. And her eyes had looked almost blind. Like the very light blue had gone almost white. And she's gasping, and it was just horrible. And I'm in there alone with her, and I'm holding her hands, and she's grasping at me. She was gesturing towards her rosary. I grab it and I'm like, Nanny, you want your rosary? And the way she indicated it was that she didn't want to just hold it. She wanted me to pray it with her. And this is going to kill me to say this, but, I started, I'm like, okay. So like I held it and I said 2 prayers. I didn't even know where to start with. I just said an Our Father. And then I realized I didn't know how to pray a rosary and I didn't know what to do. And she was so frantic that she just wanted somebody to pray the rosary with her. I put it down and I said, Nanny, I'm so sorry. I can't do this. And I left the room and I went outside for a cigarette. I was still smoking at that time and was bawling outside. And it's just this really emotional moment. And I look back now and I just think, oh my goodness, like all she wanted was somebody to pray the rosary with her. And I couldn't give her that. And that's something I've really had to try to deal with. And one of the reasons why I have such a strong devotion to the rosary now. But that was a big changing point for me. And our priest kept coming in and he would administer the sacraments to her. And he was so great with our family and he was so great to her. And he'd come in on his own. We didn't have to call. She was, a beloved member of her church community. And he was just so loving. And I remember watching her dying and it was such a beautiful death. It was such a beautiful death because she was surrounded by her family. She had received the sacraments. Her priest knew her. And that's what struck me at her funeral. He knew her name where he didn't have to look down at a book because she had never gone to mass and he didn't know what her name was. He spoke about her from his own heart. And I remember being struck by that and thinking, well, I want that. Like, I want the priest to know who I am one day. But that, I kind of shelved that again, right? So she died. We buried her. I put all those emotions aside. Okay. So one night, Jason and I, who had not wanted kids, one night, without being too vulgar, decided to throw caution to the wind and see if we could get pregnant. And I don't want, being a pro-life Catholic now and a friend of so many women who have experienced so much infertility and loss, I am not making light of this, but I need you to understand what our headspace was like at that time. And I got pregnant that night. And that did not go well. My marriage continued to spiral out of control during the pregnancy. Jason was not connected to me. We fought every single day. He wouldn't come home or he'd be super late. I just turned more and more to my own parents, and which bothered him more and more because one of his things was that I never felt like I left my house. I always turned to everybody else but him first, and that really bothered him. Obviously, he's supposed to be my husband, and I would call, I'd run to my mom for everything. And there's nothing wrong with being close with your parents. I'm still very close with my mom, but I turned first to everybody but him. And it's that self-feeding cycle because he would turn further away and then I would turn back to the people that did care about me. And we had no idea what to expect when this baby was born. So we have the baby, and I was still absolutely shocked that they just put a baby in your arms and send you home from a hospital and you have to keep this human alive.
Good luck.
Right. And true. Right. And I'm holding her and I'm like, okay, like I have to literally keep you alive. Like this is the biggest challenge of my life. And Jason was back to work within a few days and I just didn't know what I was supposed to feel. And then a couple of days into him being at work, I held her in my arms and I had music on and the song My Girl came on. And so I was holding her and I was singing it. And then I looked at her and then the song was happening. And then I looked at her again. And then, my heart literally exploded. Like for the first time in my life, I loved something and someone more than myself. And I softened because I was a very icy person, and I actually warmed up a bit, and I loved my baby, and I sobbed over top of her. Like I was sobbing all over her face. And I was like, you're my girl. You're my girl. I love you so much. And I used to think, and I've said this before, that when my friends would talk about their babies, I used to think they were lying. Like they felt like they had to say how much they loved their kids. And I think this is important to share, because for our listeners who aren't pro-life Catholics, who are having 8 or 9 babies, who are like, I don't know about all this baby thing. I was like you. Like I honestly thought women felt that they had to talk about how great their kids were and like hang their drawings up at work because they had to. I get now that you do that because you actually love your kids. It's a crazy thing. But yeah, I fell in love with Charlotte. But during this time, the gulf between me and Jason grew larger and larger, because Charlotte was very clingy to me, did not want to be held by her dad. So then I would start having these fantasies of like a Gilmore Girls life. Like I started, for a long time, I had this hidden in my heart where I could retreat to this future where it could be Charlotte and I sharing a 1-bedroom apartment and on our own. It was very dark. And then when Charlotte was 13 months old, we had a great weekend, and boom, we thought, let's have another baby. Oh, right. Yep. And this happens to a lot of people, where you have a good couple days and you think, hey, I really like you. Let's have another baby. And boom, I got pregnant again. And it got even worse. It got so bad. And Jason was really keen on making it work at this time, and I wasn't. I was done. And he started to change, and I started to see a transformation happening. And Jason wrote me a letter at that time where he said, one day I want to make you the proudest woman ever. I want you to be so proud of me. This made me reflect back on a time where I had been praying early on in our relationship if I was supposed to be married, if I was supposed to be with him. And at that time, I had been new to praying, and I didn't even know if I was praying right, but I kept saying, God, am I supposed to be with this man? Am I supposed to be with this man? And the craziest thing happened. At that time, I was working in a retail store, and we had a really bad blizzard, and nobody had been in the store all day. So I had that little wooden cross that I talked about earlier. It had been in my apron pocket at work, and it was pressed into my palm. And I was doing circles around the perimeter of the store and just saying, Lord, am I supposed to be with him? Am I supposed to be with him? Nobody was coming in. And at about 7:00 that night, the doors open, and like, it's like out of a movie where the snow blows in, and the snow blew in. Yes. And this man comes in with a cane and a big beard, and I lock eyes with him, and I said, oh, hello. Like, what brings you in? And he's like, oh, just looking around. And then I went over to talk to him further, as we were trained to do in retail. And I went over to find out what really brought him in. And he said, oh, I'm a priest. I'm a Jesuit priest. And I went, oh, I said, well, I was raised Catholic. And I said, well, I'm marrying a guy who is going to be a minister. And he said, well, holy men have a lot of problems, don't they? And I went, oh, yeah, they do. And he goes, well, I counsel holy men now. And I'm a psychologist for them. I said, oh, wow. And he said, I am supposed to tell you that you are supposed to be with him. And I'm like, what? And I start bawling in the store.
Whoa.
Right. And he's like, you have been given extra strength to carry him right now. And if you carry him, he will carry you for the rest of your life. And I'm a mess. And my coworkers are like, are you okay? Thinking this man's like attacking me. And I'm like, I'm okay. And all of them were atheists at this point. And I'm like, not even sure I'm a Christian. So I don't even know what's going on. And I wasn't going to explain it to them. So he said, can I pray with you? And I said, yes. And he put his hands on my hands. And it was, I think, the first time I had ever been prayed with. And he left. Now, Jason, if Jason were sitting here, he'd like to point out that the man did leave me his email address. So Jason's like, he's not an angel. He had an email address, but I'll have you know.
I was going to say,
after one, yes.
I'm like, I've seen It's a Wonderful Life. I feel like this has happened before.
And having watched a lot of Highway to Heaven recently, I mean, he's had addresses in that show. So, I mean, there's no way that this man didn't have some kind of divine connection. Okay. So jumping back to this pregnancy with our second baby. And at that time, I kept reflecting back on that man. And I'm like, I feel like I'm supposed to be with Jason, but this is no marriage. Like, there's nothing here. And so as the pregnancy was progressing, little did I know that Jason had been considering Catholicism. And he had been a lifelong Anglican. He had been raised going to church every single weekend. His parents were very involved in the church. Brief background that I have Jason's permission to share. His father was raised Catholic in a very Catholic family, and his father then became Anglican when he married his mother. And so Jason comes from Catholic roots, but knew nothing about any of that when he was a kid. All he knew was a very happy Anglican. And so the thing is, Jason had always been drawn a little bit to the Virgin Mary. And even in his dorm room when we were dating at his Anglican seminary, he had a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary and a rosary hanging around it. So I think she was always there because he has such a devotion to her now. I think truly she has been his mother since obviously long before he knew that. But at this time, he had started listening to YouTube videos by a then lesser known Father Barron, now Bishop Barron.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And this is back in 2008. And I remember hearing the opening of every one of those videos coming from our home office. And it was like, dude, I can't do it. Like the opening of the videos. And I was getting angry. Every time I'd hear that, I was getting angrier and angrier because I'm like, now, in my head, I'm thinking, now what? You're going to become Catholic? Like what? I'm Catholic, which again, I wasn't.
Right. And you were struggling already with, you said like in the past, he kind of had interests and fingers in many different circles, right? So to you at this point, you'd be like,
that's
another
exactly
one,
what it felt like, yeah,
right?
Another phase.
Okay.
Like this is just who you're going to be now, because it always felt like he was putting on characters. Right. And I said that to him. I'm like, so this is who you are now. Like our marriage is falling apart, and you're putting your attention into becoming Catholic. Like what? So I didn't know this, but he had been praying for about 2 weeks that if God wanted him to become Catholic, that someone would put a rosary in his hand. And we were visiting family, and I won't get into too many of the details, but someone very unlikely put a rosary in his hand, had just come back from a vacation and said, "Oh, Jason, I picked this up for you." And it was completely out of the blue. And the look on his face, and I didn't know that he'd been praying this. So he grabbed me and pulled me aside, and he's like, I have to become Catholic. It was just like matter of fact like that. And he hadn't been talking to me about any of this. So I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, I have to become Catholic now. I'm like, what? So he said, well, which church should we go to? And I'm like, well, the only one I can think of was my childhood church where I had done my sacraments, and it happened to be right behind our house that we were living in. So we called them up, and I had never heard of this new priest that was there. And I was a little bit sad it wasn't the last priest I'd heard of being there. And we go meet with him about Jason becoming Catholic. And as soon as we go in and sat there, we poured out everything to this priest, and he ended up being the absolute right priest at the right time. And he was everything God knew that we needed. But it wasn't that simple still, right? But I sat there and poured my guts out and bawled, and him and Jason really got talking about Jason's coming into the church and if he would need RCIA, considering he had a master's degree of divinity and all this kind of thing. They were hammering out those details, and I was trying to figure out, where do I fit in? Like, am I going to become Catholic? Because I had never really been Catholic, like really.
Right. That's interesting that your thought was, am I going to become
it really
Catholic?
Was.
And forgetting that you were baptized as a
and
child.
had received my sacraments. And it was truly like, am I going to convert like to Catholicism alongside Jason? It was never an idea of going home to the Catholic Church. So I just kind of let Jason meet with the priest, and they had several meetings leading up to him being welcomed into the church as a Catholic. And I was there for that night and felt very proud of him and emotional, and was already starting to feel like a part of the church myself, because we had started going to mass every Sunday at that time. And then we had the baby in October. So this was August, and then we had the baby October 1st. And it all fell apart again. But at this time, Jason was new. He was made new. And he had gone to confession. And he will tell people about this, that it was the single most transformative thing he's ever experienced, where he felt a physical lifting of sin off of him. And so how can you not be a new person? He was a new person, right? He was, I hate to say born again, but he was. There was a death. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later because we both went through a death. And I saw that in him, but I was so hesitant to trust this change. And I wasn't changing yet. I was simmering in a lot of emotions and a lot of anger and a lot of resentment and a lot of stubbornness and unwilling to change. So at this time, we were going to mass every Sunday, but we had no idea what we were doing. We were so poorly catechized that we were still pretty much Monday to Saturday living a non-Catholic life and then going to mass on Sundays. But there was a difference in our hearts. Like I desired to know God for the first time in my life. I desired to draw closer to Mary and to Jesus. But I had no understanding. I acknowledged with my intellect that Jesus was present in the Eucharist. I remember that. And I acknowledged with my intellect that the church teachings on things were correct. But I didn't accept all of those teachings yet at that time. But I had made the conscious decision that if I was going to be attending Mass and that we were going to finally baptize our kids, because we hadn't baptized Charlotte, because again, I didn't want to be a hypocritical Christian. So when we had Deacon, we were going to then baptize the kids together. And because I'm like I said, very authentic, I knew that if I was going to go ahead and have my children baptized, then I better accept the church's teachings as truth, but I didn't personally believe them all. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, yeah, okay, I'm trusting in the process of the Catholic Church, but I'm still rejecting some of the teachings myself. So we went along like with life like this, and we just slowly rebuilt our marriage, and things started to get good. Things started to get really good. And we had to, like I was saying earlier, die to ourselves for the first time ever. Like, we had to even learn what that means. Like, what does that language mean? There was a night, and I remember it was about 11 o'clock at night, and I was still sweeping the kitchen. And I've told the story before, and I might have told it on the podcast, but I was sweeping the kitchen, and Jason was sitting having a beer, and I was sweeping angrily. Have you ever swept angrily, Michelle?
Oh yeah, the rage sweep. Yep.
Yes.
Familiar with that.
That's right. And I was doing that, and I'm mumbling inside my head going, oh, and of course you get to sit again, right? I've been up with these two kids, and I work too, and blah, blah. And I was so angry, and I felt something in me say, offer him another beer. And I'm like, what? Like, this is the complete opposite of what my conscience normally says.
Like,
normally
that can't be right.
Right. No, sorry. Say that again. And so normal Lindsay would go in there and rage on him, would go in there and get angry and lecture my husband about everything that he was doing wrong and everything I was doing right. Because that's the woman I was. That's who I was for years. And this new voice was like, offer him a beer. And I'm like, that's ridiculous, but okay. So I did. I popped my head around the corner, and I had to use the fakest voice ever. I'm like, would you like another beer? Because Michelle, honestly, I didn't even have a nice voice. Like my default was not a nice tone of voice. I wasn't a nice person. So I was like, how do I speak nice? Like, I didn't know what to do. Would you like another beer? And he, like, his jaw hit the ground and he looked up stunned, and he's like, oh my gosh, are you still cleaning the kitchen? That was his answer. And I'm like, oh yeah, I am. It's okay. Like, do you want another beer? And he goes, oh, let me help you. And I'm like, what just happened? What just happened? And I realized then he isn't ignoring, like, he isn't doing this deliberately. He just honestly was exhausted, and he had no idea I was still cleaning. Like, it's not that he was without blame, and yes, he should have noticed, right? But it wasn't a deliberate and malicious attack on me. Like, I was always the victim.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, like, he just honestly is trying to unwind, and he's tired, and he's probably wondering, like, why am I not unwinding? Because that's the thing men do. They're really good at going, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to lay down. And they just do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to bed. And they just go to bed. And they're not second guessing it or playing any mental games here. They're just doing that. And then they're like, why don't you just sit down? Like, you don't have to sweep the kitchen. Come sit down. Anyways, this was like this broadening of my mind. It was this huge moment where I'm like, try to think about other people, Lindsay. So that was, I decided, I actually had to make a conscious decision at that point to start to treat Jason differently. I ended up having to quit my job at that same time because Charlotte had severe eye issues and needed about 5 hours of visual therapy a day. And Deacon wasn't speaking until he was almost 4. And so he was taking a lot of speech language pathology and stuff. And so the kids really needed me. And we had heard Charlotte praying in her bed, and she was about 3 or 4 years old, and she didn't know we heard her. And I heard her say, "Dear God, can you have my mom and dad sit on the same couch on the same day?" And
wow.
yeah, my heart got ripped out because we never used babysitters. And so we always worked every single day opposite each other. And so I started being home with our kids, and I fell in love with that lifestyle. And I remember the first time I made dinner for him, because I never cooked. That's the other thing too. When we got married, I always said, "Listen, you'll have a clean house, but I'm never going to cook. Like, you can open your own can of chunky soup." That was always our joke. I remember making that first meal when the kids were home with me, and I remember putting on music, like jazz music, and he came home and I had candles lit and music on, and the kids were happy, and he was like, "What is this?" and I got really excited. I remember getting butterflies in my tummy for him coming home for the first time ever. I was like anticipating his reaction to whatever meal I put down on the table. And I started to feel like there was great value in this role. And he started to rise to the occasion of wanting to provide more money and more stuff for us as the provider. He started working a little bit more, but not so much that he was a workaholic, but like he rose to the challenge of being the sole provider. Now, what is really important to note here is that this is nothing short of a miracle, because I have known a lot of marriages, and the fact that Jason and I slowly started to soften towards each other and into our new roles in such an easy way, considering the bumpy road we had been down, is nothing short of God's grace. Like, nobody travels like that at the same time, where we both start turning towards each other at the same time. I can't believe that happened. That's the one thing we talk about all the time when we look back on it, is the fact that God helped us journey together towards, so our hearts really started to soften towards each other, and we kept going to mass. And so while I can sit here and say, well, we were only Catholics on Sunday, we weren't learning anything, we weren't really getting anything out of mass. Yeah, those things were true, but obviously the power of the sacraments were working in us, because we were starting to become transformed. In 2010, now Charlotte is almost 4, Deacon's almost 2, and I am almost 30, and boom, I have my own breakdown.
Oh my goodness.
All of my pent up things that I'd still not fully dealt with and I'd pushed down all came out in the summer before I turned 30. And I think that some of it had to do with the fact that I had been with Jason since I was 19. I had felt like I was an adult since I was 15. And then I didn't have my 20s at all. I was married and having babies, like a lot of our listeners. And I kind of feel like I had already been an adult for a very long time. And when I was about to turn 30, it kind of really hit me that I'm about to be 30. And in my head, I was done with children, because again, we weren't catechized, so we didn't know that we really shouldn't be contracepting. And I'd had a boy and a girl, and I'd had my body back. I was like thinner than I had ever been. I was feeling fantastic and loved my life apart from Jason and my kids too much, and just went down my own path of partying and making unwise decisions and just really not being a good role model for my little children. It just got really bad. And in that moment, Jason showed me a type of mercy that I was never capable of showing him. And it was the first time I witnessed real Christian love in action, and how Christ loves us and how he is ready to love me through my husband. I'd never seen anything like that. And it was a very challenging, and this is where, like Fulton Sheen says, sometimes the only way our Lord can get into our hearts is to break them. Well, my heart had been broken over and over again, but this was the final time I was really knocked down. Like my knees were broken. Like essentially I was on my knees now, and feeling my desire for God in a way that I had never felt before, because all along I still felt like I was doing things. I was controlling it, that I had the power and that I needed to seek out the power and take control. All along I was fighting God in that. And all along he was just like, I need you to see how much you need me. And so he kept allowing painful things to keep happening to me. And I call it my decade of darkness. It really was 10 years from the age of 20 to 30 of a lot of pain, of unimaginable pain, of things that break most people and most marriages. And I couldn't see why this God that I was trying to seek out would let this all happen to me. And it wasn't until much later that I now thank him. I thank God daily for those 10 years of darkness, because I wouldn't have looked for him. I wouldn't have. And so again, at this time, we're still attending the Novus Ordo Mass at our regular parish. And so we really looked into what it meant to be open to life and if I should be contracepting. And so we decided to stop all that and got pregnant and had the most incredible pregnancy. So I had two very emotionally trying pregnancies, right? And this one, from the minute I conceived this baby, he's still to this day, he's my sunshine. Like, he's like this blondie, ginger-haired kid that radiates golden rays of light. Like, he just, that's who he is. And he was like that from the moment he was conceived. I could feel like this glowing happiness of joy, this ball, truly a bundle of joy growing within me.
Wow.
And Jason and I were so united in this pregnancy and just so excited. And the other kids were excited. And wonderfully at the same time, well, this is actually incredibly bittersweet, because his mother's passing allowed us the little bit of money she was able to leave for us, allowed us to pay off the rest of our debt and then move finally out of our ghetto townhouse that we called ghetto townhouse that we did own. We owned it for 7 years. We were able finally to move and to buy the dream house that we always considered our dream house, just the little house we're in now. But it was like such a representation for us of what we were coming out of and what we were leaving. And when on the last day in that old house, that house was filled with ghosts, if I can say that, and not in a weird supernatural way. Like all of the fights, all of the pain, all of the crying, all of that was bottled up in that house. And we looked at each other and we're like, it stays here. We're not bringing any of this with us to the new house. And we started fresh. And at the very same time, my husband decided to try the traditional Latin Mass. And I went with him. He went first time on his own without me and the kids. And then he brought us. And I, within a minute of the opening bars of chant, felt my whole body covered in goosebumps. I had never experienced anything like this. And there was immediately within me a feeling that I had come home for the first time ever in my life. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that we were exactly where we were supposed to be now, and that Catholicism is 100% true, and that it is ancient and new. And it was just, it was like a deposit of faith in one of those miraculous deposits of faith. Like, I had an understanding of the church that I had never had before within seconds of the Mass starting. Like, it changed everything for me. It was the most crazy experience. And I turned to him like, this is it. Like, and so when we go back to when I was that 15-year-old girl and I was so hungry for the supernatural, what I was looking for was the extraordinary, right? And we call that Mass the extraordinary form. And I was searching for something that said to me that we are not of this world, and that there's something else waiting for us, and that we are set apart, and that we are different, and that there is a power out there that we can, I guess, tap into. But it's God. Like, it's not within me. The power doesn't come from me. The power comes from God, and He has adopted me as His daughter, and that I share in that relationship with Him. And I just, all of that hunger that I had for that in high school that was so misdirected and looking everywhere else for it, I found in the traditional Latin Mass. And I'm not saying that it is not present at the Novus Ordo. I am not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the way the liturgy is organized there, and like we've talked before with our Lent episode with the smells and bells, right? You were talking about the bells and the incense, all of those things. It tapped into that supernatural side of me. It helped me understand with my body and my intellect that something supernatural is happening at the Mass. And that was it. So I found over the years that people who attend their first traditional Latin Mass, they either are terrified and they never come back, or they go home and they start Googling it because they want to know what they're seeing. Like, why is this happening? Right? It's so different than what we've grown up with. And so we were the people who started Googling it. And for the first time ever in our relationship, and we had been together 12 years at that point, Jason and I had a common interest, right? We had nothing in common before. We didn't like the same music. We didn't like the same books. We didn't like the same TV shows. Suddenly we were both really into the Mass. And so we started Googling it together and sharing articles with each other. And he'd come home from work and I'd be like, but did you read this? And we would listen to videos together. And it was the Mass that really unified our marriage because we fell in love with it together. And again, that was a grace from God, 100%. Again, I know many marriages, and I know many of you are listening where you're on that journey alone, where you have fallen in love with the Mass in a whole new way, and your husband is not with you on that, or vice versa. And you're like, why am I going through this alone? And so I know that that's very common in a lot of marriages. And ours was a very unique situation. Now, that being said, we had been to hell and back. So it's not like we didn't put in 10 years of absolute torment. So it's like that when we finally turned outside of ourselves and our own desires and our own shortcomings and everything we were nitpicking about each other, when we turned away from that and both towards God at the same time, God was able to fill our marriage with something brand new. And I want to say too, we had been married in the Anglican Church back in 2004. When we did finally have our kids baptized in 2008, we did have to have a convalidation ceremony. So our marriage was made Catholic in 2008. I feel like God saw all of our efforts, no matter how measly they were, even just attending Mass those Sundays, right? Those early years when we were starting to go to Mass, when we didn't fully understand, he saw all of that and he banked that all. Like you and I talk all the time about he'll just take the smallest thing we can try to give him. And he knows, like children, that we don't know what we're doing, that my child will make the bed because I've asked him to, maybe not because he doesn't understand the role in our house and why it's important that he helps with the chores, but he'll do it because I asked him to. So a lot of what I did at the beginning was out of obedience, wasn't out of a love for God, wasn't out of a desire to please him. It wasn't even out of a fear of hell. It was because I was obedient. And I think that was a common theme throughout my development in the faith, is that I always sought obedience and God always rewarded that. Always. That was Jason and I as we were going into that. And then we knew with the third baby that we wanted a fourth baby. And so we were blessed with a fourth baby, and that we did not take that for granted at all. And so we had this new family and we were new people and a new marriage and a new home and a new church community that welcomed us with open arms, despite the fact that I was dressed like completely immodestly and we had no idea what we were doing. And they didn't judge us at all. That Latin Mass community just was so incredible from the early, and we were one of the only families with young babies there. And they were so incredible, journeying alongside us. That's where we're at now. That was in 2012. It's now 2020. And we just grew deeper and deeper in our faith. And as soon as we turned our attention towards God, God renewed our marriage and renewed everything. And I am so in love with my husband in a way that I didn't even think was possible in those early days. It's like, and he feels the same way. We just are so made new. And just, we see each other now as God sees us in our marriage. There is a peace and a joy in my family that anybody that has gotten to know us over the last couple of years comments on, that there's a feeling in our house. And I cry almost daily still because I know what the feeling was in our house before that. And it was so dark. And it's been 8 years now of this pure joy, and 10 years really of our marriage getting better. And not for 1 second am I ever going to forget where we came from. And that God was never away from us during that period. I see that now. I see that when I had no connection to him, when I wasn't turning to him, he was still right there. He was just waiting. And he is so patient with us. And I didn't want to know him, but he knew me. And he knew it was a long-term commitment on God's part too, because he really invested in Jason and I and knew that we would come around to him. It just took us a really long time. And now that we're there, you know, when you've come through things that we've come through, there's no going back. And I just want to grab everybody and be like, I know how to fix what you're going through. I've been there. So yeah, we have these beautiful kids. I ended up homeschooling. So I went from like a Wiccan, feminist, pagan, angry, no, I didn't want kids woman to like a traditional Catholic veiling homeschool mom. And we would have had as many children as God would have blessed us with, but he blessed us with only 4. And that's all sadly that we can have physically, but we have 4 beautiful children, and we are just so thankful every day for every single thing that happened to us, good and bad. And that's it. Now we just praise and worship him for everything he's done for us.
Well, Lindsay, on behalf of myself and everyone else who has had the chance to listen to your amazing story, thank you for having the courage to share it with us today. And if anyone out there has listened to Lindsay's story and would like to talk, would like to get in touch with Lindsay, or just have someone to speak to, please feel free to reach out to us. And you can find us on our website at www.themodernlady1950.wordpress.com. You can also leave us a comment or a private message on Facebook or Instagram at The Modern Lady Podcast. And you can find me on my Instagram account at mmsachs, and you can absolutely contact Lindsay at her Instagram account at Lindsay Homemaker. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a great week, and we will see you next time.